welcome to the Product Design for Learning podcast. We have Alice Thompson with us. Alice is at M&S. Alice, could you tell us a little bit more about what you do at M&S, just so we can get an overview and how that relates to the market and release theme that we've got today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Greg, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
No worries.
So my role is development partner. And I'm part of the kind of international side of M&S. So what that means is I work with kind of multiple partners globally, and that includes our franchises and our owned markets as well. And a big part of my role is kind of how do we look at a really efficient way to train our international stores and also our kind of support office colleagues as well. So, how do we get learning to them from the UK? How do we utilize kind of subject matter experts within the business and get that knowledge out to them? And also, I think the way it links to this is it's interesting because you have to look at, what's the challenge in terms of delivering a great customer experience out in our stores and international. And we'll have conversations about that, and I'll go speak to colleagues and then think about, well, what's the most efficient way that we can help equip you to do that? So I think that's kind of how it sort of links to this. But I think there's also some really interesting challenges that we've got in terms of, look after our colleagues here in the UK in terms of how do you take your expertise in your role and how do you apply that to a global business? And with that comes a lot of skills and that we need to build and challenges we need to solve. So my role is to really unpick those and just think what's the most kind of critical skills that we can build in this group of people to help us deliver this strategy internationally. And it's exciting because it's such a huge opportunity for growth for our organisation. So it's really cool.
Amazing. And that was one of the first things when we spoke recently when you were telling about your current role. I was quite glad you picked the market and release theme purely because it's international and it's such a well-known brand. So in the UK, M&S is and I'm 40 now, so I'm super old, but it was always there. Then I guess internationally it's kind of, maybe it's considered new in some locations, but then you're trying to release things into a heritage company that's doing things brand new in other territories. So kind of brings me to the first comment around, or the first question even around, could you summarize why this phase of the process, so when we talk about market and release, is really, really important to you, but specifically into the type of work you do?
I think you touched on it, but do you know what's really interesting? Is we've been in international for about 60 years.
Wow.
So
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, right. So, and I didn't know that either. So I think it's quite interesting when people say, I think we've done well, but I think there's so much opportunity for us as well. And it's not, I think it's changed in terms of where we have been located. So it's been an interesting journey over the last 60 years, but I think where you're spot on with the newness side of stuff is we are also, there's a lot of, we are a heritage company, but in terms of keeping us up to date with style and with newness, there's a lot of new products coming out from a UK perspective, which we have to then share with our international team. So I think that's where this phase comes in, really sort of useful in terms of market and release, because I think this is about engaging the right people with your content at the right time. So we need to react, and I think that it's just about how do we help people to understand these are the products, for example, that are hitting your floor, and this is your shop floor, and this is the information you need to know about to prepare you for that. So you have to be quite quick. So I think it's about engaging people with that information and putting it in the right channels to get it to those people.
Yeah.
So it kind of involves a lot of understanding your audience. But I guess this piece in particular, I guess the marketing side for me it's really looking at it as what it says on the tin. So promoting and selling your L&D products and basically showing them how it's going to improve what they're doing. How is this going to make life easier? How is this going to improve the customer experience or how we kind of sell our products? And then releasing it is all about generating that publicity. So are we working with the right people? Are we going via the right channels? Are people seeing it at the right time? And the reason I think this is so important is because, like, if you don't get this bit right, I think all the bits in the other stages kind of will go to waste, because it's like, then similarly, you have to get all those earlier bits right to make this bit work. So it is kind of all intertwined. But yeah, so that's why I think it's so important, because I guess it's just about thinking like a marketeer, which I guess is one of the first things you probably learn coming into this profession, is how do you think like a marketeer? And I think this bit really leans into that skill as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things so 100% agree with everything you just said. One of the things someone told me a couple of years ago was we shouldn't wait to start thinking about our marketing when we get to this stage. Like, you should, as soon as you get to a point of not even actually knowing what your product will be. So even if you're at the super early stages, is you would probably, or you should be, thinking about your audience before you're thinking about what your product's going to be. They're saying that's when you should start thinking about your marketing. Like, what do they care about? What do they not care about? What kind of bits of information? So they're telling me about like thumb stoppers, like when you're sort of scrolling through things, what makes you do that and stop your feed to go, something caught my eye, either it's an image or it's a stat or it's something that's made you go, oh, I'm going to stop this kind of like really super fast scrolling. But it's mad that we do it all the time and we don't think about it in learning as much.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's spot on. Like, we can almost like stop this there. Like, it's about just think about it from the very beginning. But yeah, no, you're right. And actually, like, I think if we don't think about it from the start, it's like, why are we even creating this product in the first place if we're not thinking about that? Like, so I guess we really have to challenge ourselves, and I guess we'll go into it more as we talk. But yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like, you have to be thinking about this, and it has to weave through everything you do before this stage, 100%.
Yeah. And what obvious things do you think that you see L&D missing out on, whether it's from previous roles or whether it's now being in more of an international role? What kind of things do you, I guess L&D as a whole, doesn't even have to be specific to a company.
Yeah. So I think what would I say on that? I think like appealing to how people operate in real life and what's people's reality. I think sometimes we miss out on that. And especially, I wouldn't be able to do what I do if I didn't get out there and I didn't go and speak to the people on the shop floor and like in all of those markets. And that's the thing that I sort of say to everyone is think about how people operate in real life. How do they interact with things outside of work as well? Like, how do they interact with the channels you're using or tech or anything? Like, who are they as humans? And how does that work? And I think that's probably a big thing I think we miss, because we're in, I know we've probably said this a lot, but I don't know if we lean into it enough. It's like, just because we are in work, it doesn't mean that we need to drastically change what we do. So it does in some ways, but I think it's just, we are still human. Things still are growing and evolving around us. So tap into that. And then, I don't know, I think the other piece of me is again, leaning into like us as humans. And I think we all want to lead a very purposeful life. Like, we want to come to work and we want to have a purpose. And I think we miss the opportunity of tapping into those free resources of getting people on board first and encouraging people to follow them, because people love to influence, people love to share their expertise with others. So who are those people that you can lean into to say, hey, why don't you get involved in this, and give them that additional purpose? In my context, it might be picking up on someone, in an international store that has information like that they could share with other people. Like, it doesn't have to always come from you. It can come from the other way. It can go bottom up. Yeah. But I just think that's another piece we miss, is like, I think people want to, or people are keen to kind of share their expertise and share their knowledge. And I think, again, that's a real like undertapped resource, especially in marketing and release.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's the disconnect where I've seen it is I think people do want to share and people want to be seen as, I'm going to say expert, but like inverted commas, but like people want to be seen as good at what they do, but it's how you get them to do that. So like the amount of times I've heard internal teams or teams we've worked with, clients saying, we're going to make a podcast internally and we're going to put it out and then people can listen to it on the way to work. And I'm like, all of that is to a degree true. Yes, they could listen to it on the way to work, but they're going to.
Yeah.
And chances are they're going to do anything other than that on the way to work because they're not at work yet. And maybe they don't really care about it. But then there might be people that go, oh, Alice is on it. And I know she's really good at what she does. And her diary's always crazy busy. So I'll listen to this podcast because that's quicker than waiting to see when she's free. That might happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I don't know how often that happens with everything else that people do. Like it's, and you mentioned about channels. I think just getting people to think about channel marketing rather than just, well, I've told you, so you'll do it. Like, it doesn't work like that now.
No, exactly. Like, I think this is the thing. People need to understand the benefit. Like, I'm going to listen to this because it's going to help me do X, Y, Z. And that will come from the piece that you do around like generating your hypothesis earlier on and getting that data earlier on. Like, if you get that spot on, once you kind of put it in front of someone, like they hopefully will engage with it. We can talk about it more, but I think, if it's actually going to solve a problem, you need to get that bit right. But I mean, because I love podcasts and I listen to them, as I'm getting ready for work and on my way into work. Like, that's the thing that I use to like kind of calm my mind or get myself in the zone. It's not always work related. It's work related if I've got, something that I'm designing and I want to hear some thought leadership on it. I'll choose that podcast. So yeah, I think it's really interesting that people think, oh yeah, because everyone loves a podcast, we'll pop it on there. It's like, it's just, it's not always the way. But I think it's hard. I mean, it's almost a little bit the way there. Let's like give it the credit of you are thinking about the channels, but is it relevant?
That's the thing. I think it is. I think it's when people, maybe podcast was a bad example because we're recording a podcast. But like maybe it's when people kind of hone in on one thing and just go, well, this is something that could happen, so this is what they will do. And it's like trying to, and maybe I fell into this trap years ago as well, but hopefully from learning from my mistakes, I don't do it as much. But like if you just focus on one channel of marketing to people, unless that's the only way that you can communicate with them, chances are they're going to look at a million other things that week. Yours is one thing, so you need to try and get them in different ways, different messages. And there was a whole thing. I did a really quick case study with Netflix, not with them, but using some of their material, where like the little cards that pop up when you're scrolling, they refer to them as box cards. And they did this internal test themselves around. So they took the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt as a show. They had 6 different title cards that they put out, and they kind of like A/B tested them across different locations, and then they kind of very quickly whittled it down to, it didn't matter how colourful they were, it didn't matter how good the description was, it was people's faces. Then it had to be fewer faces. So when they had like a whole ensemble picture, there was maybe 6, so it was like, it's too busy. But if you had 2 people or 1 person and they were very expressive, if it was just a kind of this, it was fine. But if it was like, they were like, that got way more engagement than the other ones. And just these really basic things of going, it's the same channel, but it's what you put out on that channel. It's the approach you give to say, you've maybe got 2 seconds, 3 seconds of someone's attention before they go, no, I'm going to keep looking.
Exactly. It's so true.
Mad.
It is mad. And actually, I might contradict myself now, but you've given me a thought. It's actually, if you think about Instagram, for example, like we know, I don't know what percentage of people are on Instagram in the UK. I imagine it's pretty high. But the amount of content that is on your feed on Instagram is a hell of a lot, and you're not going to stop and watch everything. And I know that there's kind of algorithms behind it, isn't there? So depending on what you're hitting, like you're going to get more and more of that content. So it's that piece of work that you've done and previously gathering that data to understand what's relevant to this person, and then that's what they'll stop on. That's the theory, right? So it's almost like it kind of leads into what we were saying. I guess, like, yes, we could have a podcast that we say, this is our learning podcast. We put learning stuff through there. But the stuff that you see, if there isn't, maybe we're coming up with a business idea here.
Yeah.
But like maybe like the stuff that you see is the stuff that's relevant to you and your role, and we're going to suggest it to you. So it's just thinking again in the way that we're interacting with tech and resources in everyday life gives us these clues into how we can do it. But we have to do those stages that in your process of getting under the skin, really gathering the data and doing all that work. We can't just have a product, like say we think it's going to be a good idea and launch it, because it's not going to work.
Yeah, 100%. And it's also, you could have the best product in the world, but if you don't market it in the right way or at all, you kind of don't give it the chance to find out if it's any good, because nobody knows about it or they get the wrong impression of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was going to ask you, like, for someone that's maybe, if someone's listening and they maybe struggle with this phase, or maybe they're starting out in this type of phase, like they've got something really good or they're releasing a learning product, what kind of advice would you give them for someone starting out doing this?
So a couple of things. The first thing I would say is probably, I think we've mentioned it already, but think about this from the start of your process. So, from the very beginning in terms of who this is for, what it's solving, because that's going to set you up for success when you come to the marketing phase. So I think we've already covered that piece. But I think the second piece is, what are your opportunities to get familiar with the channels that your audience are on and be on them yourself and observe, like, how do people talk to each other? What's the format of things that they share with people? What language do they use? When are they there? And just almost like put yourself in the shoes of those people. And I think that's it really how you'll then start to get the ideas of, this is kind of how I can get this in front of people at the right time. So yeah, I think they would be the two sort of biggest bits of advice I think I'd give to someone to get started.
Just on one of those bits where you're saying be on the same platforms as them. So that's probably I don't disagree with this, by the way. That's probably the easy bit of, we're on the same platform. I can see what they're up to. They can see what I'm up to. What kind of things should they be looking for? Because like so I'm not on Instagram, for example, but if I went on Instagram, people are posting photos, they're engaging with it in some sort of like or repost thing, or they may be commenting. There's not a huge amount for me to kind of go after, but like how would I go beyond that? Like to be able to say, this worked really well, this very similar thing bombed. How do I pick a lane?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think you have to have conversations with people to find out, right? And I think this is you can't sort of solve this by just being like sat at your desk. Like you can look at the stuff that you've just mentioned and say like, okay, so this thing got 20 likes and 20 shares and this got 0. It's like, well, like ask the question, like ask why and find out, and go and have those conversations with people. Because I think a lot of this is relationship building. And I think if in describing my job as well, like I could probably say that genuinely a big part of my job is building relationships with the right people and connecting them with the stuff that they want. Like I kind of see myself as a trusted partner. And so in that sense, then in terms of digging into it, I guess like you need to go and speak to them and just say like, what about this got your attention? So you're kind of understanding more about it, I guess. But I think the things that I'm looking for, and this is like, I think you can get this data, even if you're just looking at a learning platform, right? You get this data. It's like, when are they online? And when do they have their downtime? Like, and I think that even that easy bit of data to get hold of will tell you, okay, so if most people are online between the hours of 10 and 11 on a Monday because their morning meetings have died down and they're like grabbing a coffee and they're probably answering some emails. That might be my moment. Like, so it's almost like, what's the story this stuff is telling you? And that's, and so I think there's a piece around generate a hypothesis around it and test it out. Like,
Yeah.
I think, you can look at the data, see what it's telling you, test it out, try posting something and see what the engagement is on it. Like, and do that test piece.
Yeah. And the thing you mentioned in there, like, I think there's definitely a point about like brand building. So like M&S was around before you and I even existed. So like its brand was already a thing, and our parents and maybe their parents, I'm not sure how old M&S is, but like older people than us already knew what M&S was and it was a thing. Whereas you're now in M&S, but you were mentioning that people will listen to you because you've gone out and spent time with them. Like, you're building your own brand internally. So sometimes it's also about like, if I turned up to M&S tomorrow and said the exact same thing you were saying to the same people, and then you did the same thing the day after, I imagine they would be like, Alice, that's great, thank you. Some guy turned up yesterday and just said some stuff like, whatever. Like, but you have a much stronger brand there. So I think sometimes it's also about, if you're marketing stuff internally, it's who's your anchor? Like, who's going to be the one that kind of gets behind it? That again, either just has a really good prominent brand, or a trusted brand, or has put the legwork in. Like,
100%. Yeah, exactly that. And I think that is another like tip around this stuff is like, who can you build your connections with to like, help you, who can you speak to? Like a great example is your communications team. Like, they, as a first example, because they will have a lot of this data that you're looking for. They will have like, so build a relationship with them. But I think the other side of it is, who in your leadership team or like can you speak to that will be able to influence, or do you have any representatives in teams that people look to and talk to them, and again start using their language and tell them what you're doing, so you've almost got like that's your trusted partner there. So
absolutely.
Look for those opportunities.
And the other thing you mentioned was about you were talking about like the Instagram scenario of this got 20 likes, this got none. Like, at what point, or what kind of, I guess we're talking very high level because it's going to be case by case to a degree, but like, if you were giving somebody some advice around trying out different marketing approaches for a learning product or an initiative they're releasing, is there any kind of like, is there a way that you would maybe always have like a very universal starting point, and how do you know when to say this is the one? Or like, I've spent too long figuring stuff out, I need to just go with one of them. Like, where do you kind of stop yourself from being in this kind of endless testing phase?
That's a really good question. How do I do that? Gosh, I don't know about that. I mean, so you don't want to get stuck in this endless loop, and I guess that's always why. So I guess that's always why I would say kind of like, you always want to start small. But do you know, there's a piece actually, if I start here, there's a piece on your website where you're talking about being really creative, like, and you kind of say, get into a room and start really freaking big, and then work as a team to unpick those ideas, and then like try and land on something that you think might be realistic. And so it's kind of like, I think that is a good way to do this, and land on something that you think, right, we've done all the pre-work, we know our people, like we've gone really big and got really creative, like we've landed on this thing, let's try it out. And I think put it out there, see what kind of responses you get. I always just think as well, like, don't look at this as in like isolation, because sometimes it might be that you've got this one thing that you've put out there, and it might not be that that's the wrong channel. It might be that there's this is as part of like the wider problem. Like, it's one thing as part of your ecosystem of learning. So maybe it's like, well, how does that fit in with all of these other stuff? Like, and it might be that the channel, it's almost like trial and error, isn't it? Like, so the channel might not be right, but how does this fit in with what the bigger problem you're trying to solve?
Mm.
And maybe it's looking at it like that, really. I think, yeah, I do think as well it is part of a longer process. Maybe I'm rambling now, but I
I think
yeah.
I wouldn't see where you went with this, but I agree with you. I think there's like standard marketing. So like almost every day I'll get a leaflet through the door about a kebab shop or a window cleaner or something happening, and I pretty much do the same thing every time. Super quick look. Do I need this? Probably not. Goes in recycling. But they probably send it to like thousands of houses near where I live to go, here's a thing. And it's more like kind of, if you do it enough times, someone will call you back and someone will use your service. But then when we're talking about learning products, you can't just turn up to everyone's desk and flyer them every day and be like, guys, we're still doing this. Like, guys, use our thing.
Yeah. And maybe you're onto something there, because maybe it's not about like, you know, if you've done all your pre-work and you think, right, this is how I'm going to sort of market and release this stuff. I guess like maybe the data you want to look for isn't just your engagement data, but is it actually solving that problem? Like that's the data I think you need to look at. Are you seeing a marked improvement? And if not, like what else can you try? And I guess maybe it's about looking at it like that. Like what could we add on to this, or what can we adapt or iterate? And that's coming into your next stages, I guess, in terms of how to improve it. So maybe it's like not thinking of it, and that's probably where I was trying to get to before. I'm like not thinking of it as an isolated standalone thing, but actually like, are you seeing any shifts in the dial? Like, and again, what's that narrative telling you? Like, and so maybe it's that, and you wouldn't want to get stuck in this phase of like, oh, I don't know if anyone saw that. Like, actually, I think you probably want to move on to, okay, maybe they have seen it or they've heard someone talk to them about it, but I'm not sure if I'm actually solving the problem. And like, maybe that's the piece you want to look into. Maybe that's it. But yeah, I get what you're saying around that. Don't want to get stuck in the loop, I guess. You want to see if you made a difference.
And I guess this is like a numbers game. As in, if it is literally just like the window cleaner example, like to be fair, we do use a window cleaner because you put a thing through our door, but we needed one at the time. Whereas the next 50 that have come through the door have been like, do you know what? I like the guy you use. You're in the recycling. Sorry. But they're not only sending it to me, they're sending it to like thousands of other people, because it doesn't matter to them who it is. They just need however many they need.
So I guess that they've spread it out and tried to capture some people. Do you know what the thing I heard recently, and I don't know if this will help, but I was listening to a podcast about entrepreneurs. It's so difficult, but yeah, I was listening to something about entrepreneurs, and they were talking about how do you just get started, right? Like, how do you just get started with your business? And they were kind of saying, look, it's almost just like, how do you almost test if people would even be kind of like interested in your product? And there was a really interesting example from a company that rents clothes out, and it started with they were just kind of like, oh, I want to start this clothing rental company. How do I do it? And they were kind of like, well, you know, rather than you investing all of your time and your resource and money and gambling everything that you own on this company, like, test out, put a sign on your dormitory door and say, I've got clothes to hire. Are you interested?
Yeah.
And see who comes. And it's almost like, where are the opportunities for you to start really small and just be like, if I target you, am I getting the response I need? Great. I'm going to dial that up and dial it up and dial it up. And maybe that's the piece here with the marketing. It's like, take your idea, start small, minimal effort, and see what returns you get. And then you build and you build. So you're not getting stuck in a trap. You're constantly iterating. And maybe that's the piece.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. Like, there was something I read about really iconic adverts, or like iconic advert series And it was maybe the Steve Jobs era of Apple where, because now all their adverts are just, oh, it's a really nice thing and you can't afford it, but you're going to buy it anyway. And everyone just goes, yeah, why not? Here's my money. Whereas in the Steve Jobs era, it's all about storytelling. And it was around the same time that probably more in the UK, there was the BT series of adverts where it was the family and you watch the kids grow up over the years and it's the same 4 people. But the Steve Jobs, the Apple stuff was all like, they had the same formula, but they worked with an agency to basically hone this formula down across like a gazillion different industries where they were like, this works every time. Maybe it worked in that period of time. I don't know if it would work as much now. But it was like, you have to have clear narrative that says there is a main character and that main character has a problem or is in some sort of mild peril. Then you have a hero and the hero comes in, but that hero has to have something Apple related going on about them. Either they turn up with their MacBook or whatever it is they've got, or they're wearing a big Apple t-shirt. And then they solve the problem or they save the main character. And then at the end, you have a nice little payoff and it has to be very stylistic. And I'm probably doing it a massive injustice. There's probably way more bits of the story. But like, I went back through like 4 or 5 of their adverts from around that time. And they never call someone a main character. They never say there's a hero. They never say any of these words. But when you look at it with that formula in your head, you're like, yeah. Oh, I want that thing. And then you just end up going, oh, that's so good. Because it's been like, basically, we're like you. You're like, you're not like me. You live in a $gazillion house with like, you know, a private jet. I don't have any of those things. But then but yeah, it was incredible marketing.
Yeah. And I think I think that's a great example because there's 2 things that we can take from that. And one of them is you've really appealed to almost like the future goal. Like, I don't have this now, but if I do the same things he's doing, I might have that life in the future.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're appealing to like the end goal for people, which is definitely what we need to do here, right? But like appeal to that.
Well, mine is obviously CEO of Apple. So yeah, I'm
well, there you go.
There. Yes.
There you go. Yeah. One step closer. Dream big and all that. But the second thing is like the storytelling. Like it's that we forget how important that is as a skill for us, is the storytelling. And it's like, if you do this, I'm going to tell you and show you how it's going to help you solve this. And that is such an important skill for us to do, even if we are like, we've chosen the right channels and everything like that. It's like storytelling. How do we take people on the journey with us and help them? And then how are we sharing that with the right people to go and influence other people and share that story with them? So I think that's like 2 big things we can take from that. So
100%. And like we talked about learning tech earlier before we started recording, and like one of the things that maybe this was like 10 years ago, there was like a 3-year period where storytelling seemed to be the big topic, like year after year, like 2 or 3 years in a row. And then I went to some of them. There was one actually that was really good, but the other ones just seemed to be a little bit like they were just saying the phrase or the word storytelling and then didn't really get into it. And I was like, well, I kind of don't really feel like I know anything more than I did at the beginning. But then the more I've been talking to actual marketing people about actual marketing, and they talk about storytelling, and it's basically like everything else is secondary to them. Like the data should have already been done. That gives them the starting point for their story. They're like, if you don't have a compelling story, why do I care? And they started talking about Netflix and things. They were like, you either watch a show because someone's told you about it. Then how have they told you? They didn't just say, oh, it's called this. You've gone, what's it about? And then you tell them like a really shitty version of what the thing is actually about, but that's your version of the story rather than the actual story. But it's enough for you to go, oh, I'm into that. I'm going to watch that.
Absolutely.
And then you give up your time and, to watch a thing because of a story, to watch a story.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even exactly that. And even that when that person's telling you about it, they're going to share with you, oh, like I really enjoyed it and I binged it in 2 days. And you're like, oh, I want that. I want it.
I want that for me.
Yeah, so that's the thing. You're right. It's all about storytelling and like how we building that narrative. It's like hugely important.
But
So
then you also have a data point in there, like 2 days.
yeah,
You're like, did you do anything else on those 2 days? Oh yeah, I did like 4 hours this day and then 4 hours the next day. But like, great, you've got even more data points. Like, so like,
yeah,
if you've got a good story or even a good hook, then the story can come secondary to a degree. But like,
yeah,
if you can pull in
yeah,
your data from that way, where it's like, oh, tell me a little bit more, rather than an advert that's just, you must do this because we've told you to do it. Like, yeah, I
yeah.
can't think of anything that I would probably do if that was the case.
No, no, exactly. Yeah. And I think you're right, like with the data piece as well. I think that's also another key part is like what data are you gathering throughout this process and what
Yeah.
is that telling you? And I think there's a piece around like we might think, oh, we can just drop it and then, oh, job done. My stakeholders are happy. I've got that management training out there. Job done. Tick. Everyone's happy. But actually, it's like, how are you staying close to the data and seeing like how are people engaging with it? What do people think? And so you got to keep an eye on it.
Absolutely. I'm conscious of time, so I've
Yeah.
got
Oh
a couple
gosh.
more questions for you. When we talked about your your experience with M&S and this lovely international role, and that you've put the legwork in. So if we think about everything before then, where maybe
Yeah.
you made mistakes previously, knowingly or unknowingly,
Mm.
and everyone has them, so this is not kind of calling you out. What kind of mistakes do you think you made, knowingly or unknowingly, in the kind of market release phase where you kind of look back and go, wish
Yeah.
I'd known about that?
I've made so many mistakes. Like, it's not been an easy journey, but I think that's all part of it, right? And
Yeah.
I don't regret anything. And I'm actually, I really believe in that, like growth. I'm going to chuck out another like growth mindset. I do believe in that. It's just like, how do you learn from things that don't go so well? And so I always try and think that way because it's easy for if you've made a mistake, it impacts your confidence and all that stuff. So always try and look at it as a learning. But yeah, I think I guess the biggest thing, well, one thing that came to mind is I went heavy too soon. So what I mean by that is I put stuff in people's calendars without really understanding their day to day to try and get them to engage in something.
You did a
And
too.
yeah, yeah, I did a you too.
Jeez.
Bad move. And yeah, and I've done what you two have had to do, and I don't know if they've been successful, but I had to re-nurture that relationship and regain that trust. And I think the thing that I didn't do in that role was I didn't get out to that group of people enough. So I didn't really understand them. And, they came back to me and just said like, this just makes me feel like I'm missing out on what you've got to offer me. And it just had the complete opposite effect on my engagement that I wanted. So yeah, I just think the biggest thing I took from it is how do you, again, being a trusted person in this role is go and speak to people, understand about their world, understand what they're trying to achieve. And in return, like I will think about when I give something to you and I won't put anything to you that's not relevant to your job. And that's my commitment to you. But that was a big learning for me. And yeah, it did take time for me to get that trust back.
Yeah.
And so big learning curve.
Absolutely. Side note, I absolutely hate you too. So if I had that particular phone, I would have just straight in the bin.
Yeah.
But when you talked about like building that trust up, like if we take this external for learning for the moment, like if you're a brand new brand, you've got to start from almost nothing. And I guess it's the same as if you're a brand new person to an organization, or your audience is at least brand new to you. I still agree with everything you said. Like you need to put that legwork in to be able to say, this is really good, but I know it's really good for you because we've already spoken about it. Like I already understand, I've already at least made the effort to understand why you might need this and why you might not need something else. Or the same thing, but for different contexts, for different people. Like, at least if you can come from a point of not just going in cold and going, oh, hey, here's a thing, you have to use it. Like,
Yeah, exactly that. And it can, I think, like you can add it in as a phase, right? I think, with in terms of mapping out, like, who are your stakeholders, who are the people that you can go to speak to, but yeah, I think that there is a piece of work in having to do that, but that's not to say that you can't do it in a shorter time frame. Like, you definitely can. I think it's just being really intentional with it and going in armed with the questions that you want answered, and being really intentional in the fact that I'm building up a picture of my learners. And the way I've gone about it is obviously, over time I've generated those relationships, but because, like, I'm not just solving one thing, like, I'm going to be in this role hopefully for a long time to come, and I want to continue those relationships. I'm not just solving one thing, and so it's like almost like I want people to nurture those over time. But yeah, I think it's just it's about creating that space to map your customers.
yes,
and set you up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's like the end goal and I guess it's the same for external brands as it is internal brands. Like, we talk about this when we do branding projects a lot, where we will say to people, like, if you were looking down a street and every store had their logo outside, what's the one logo that you can spot from 100 yards away and say, I know exactly who that is. So like, McDonald's is always the obvious one. Like, it's universal. It's the golden arches. You can see it a mile away. But like, what's the thing that when you're marketing, people almost get to a point of going, I didn't really even pay attention to the marketing, but I knew that Alice sent it. So, and I know that she's a good egg and that she always says the right things or has my interest at heart. So they always kind of bypass that. But I guess you're also still at the same time trying to connect with people that don't know who you are. So you're always having that kind of secular nature of people that know and love you and have been dealt with you before, but also people that are super cold and don't know who you are at all.
Exactly. And I've looked into this before, because I'm just like, I've tried to sort of learn from places like, KPMG or the big consultancy firms. Like, how do they do this? How do they bounce around to different companies and still turn up with so much gravitas, and like, people listen to what they say? Like, how do they do it? And I've tried to unpick it. And I think what I landed on was a few things, but one of them was that they turn up and they story tell. So they tell us, this is where I made an impact before. This is the evidence I have, and I can share that with you and show how I made a difference. So they come with that. And I think that's a big part of it, so they're building that trust through showcasing how they've moved the dial. So it's like, again, I want that. Like, I want that for myself. So I think storytelling plays a big role in it. So it might not be that I've met this person before. I might go over to a new market and we've not worked together before, but I can come and say, oh, look, this is what I did over in this market. We worked on this stuff and this is the impact. So you're going in armed with that, and you can say, and you're building trust that way. And then, okay, so tell me, what is it that you want to solve, and how can I help you? And let's follow this same process, this same format, and get you to where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're doing it for all the right reasons.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. And the last thing I wanted to ask you was more, I guess it's advice, or even just like a little insight into how you operate, for whether someone is brand new to learning or been doing this for, like, I was going to say a million years, but a long time. What kind of like tools do you use, or activities do you always kind of go to when you're thinking about marketing a learning product? What's your go-to kind of tool set?
So my go-to tool set, I think, for me personally, there's a few things that I use. One is like people resource. So again, those relationships. Have I got a good relationship with my leadership team, with my communications team? So I think in terms of tools, like, how are you utilizing those relationships is a big one. I also use things like recently a new tool is like just things like AI to condense your comms. I have a habit of writing too much and it becomes, and this is always the feedback I get. And so I'm like, well, how can I condense it? So there are tools that you can use that will help condense what you're trying to say, which is very useful for me. And I think maybe just get, comfortable with chatting to people across the whole business. So like, and I think that's just a big bit for me, is like getting comfortable meeting new people, networking with people, because that's going to really serve you. Like, you might have an off the cuff conversation which will give you an idea or spark an idea for that person, or get them really passionate in what you're doing, and then you've built a follower there that can then influence other people. So I think just that's a tool for me. It's like networking and get comfortable with that, talking to people at all levels.
Yeah.
You know, if you might bump into someone in the lift and just start chatting to them, and it sounds easy, but it's really not. Like, especially
No,
I think,
I find it weird.
Yeah. So
I think it plays into what you were saying about the clothes rental scenario you gave, or the story you were telling. Like, if you could have the best intentions, or you could have worked at the company for 3, 4, 5, 40 years. But if you don't have almost like a continuous temperature check, and I hate that phrase, but a continuous temperature check of what is happening right now, where are people's interests or their angst or their desires and all these kind of things, like the things that mean something to them, whether it's good or bad, then how do you know how to craft your marketing? So by doing the things that you were just saying, spending time regularly talking to people that you either know to maintain a relationship, or just letting people know who you are and what you're about, and trying to speak to new people. Like you're continuously making sure that you're kind of, you know where things are.
Yeah, exactly. Just constantly having that dialogue is really important. And I just think, have it on your mind. I think, every time that you're interacting with something, or you've bought something, or you've followed someone, or you've watched something on Netflix, like think about what got you there. Yeah. And then that's going to give you ideas of like, actually, I could try that out with this product that I'm launching, or whatever it is. So, and I think I always believe in looking for ideas in places that you wouldn't think you'd normally find them, and it will give you just a spark, and then you can just try it out and just see, actually, if I did this, what response do I get? And I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because then it keeps you fresh as well. You're not constantly doing the same things over and over again, and you're thinking about trying something new. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I really like that. The last thing I was going to say on that was, I really like that kind of that approach of trying something new based on an experience you've had, but almost doing it, and it sounds creepy, but I don't mean it this way, like almost like a voyeuristic way, where so rather than having like a controlled group of, if I gave you this advert, what do you think? You tell me whether it's the font or what we're saying or the imagery. Whereas, because then people kind of know that you want to be critiqued, or you want the feedback.
Yeah. And
to a degree, they'll be honest and they'll have a gut reaction and all the rest of it. And I don't disagree with those things. But I also kind of like just leaving something out there. Yeah. And then just watching people. I'll tell them after, we were watching you. Can you please come talk to us? That's where it's not creepy. But for a couple of minutes, just seeing if you want them to do like a very basic action, like push this button because we've said this thing, or if you're reading it over here, we want you to go to this bit of the room because whatever we want you to do is over there. And if they kind of go, whatever, just go and sit down and be like, why didn't you go over there?
Exactly.
What is happening right now? Like,
exactly.
But then that all plays also into you pushing yourself to talk to new people and just understanding a bit more about who they are and what they do.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I got caught in one of these at once, and it was really funny because I was in a store, and I was looking at some drinks, some like matcha drinks, and the owner of the company was standing next to me, and I was looking at the drinks, and I picked one up, and they said, "Excuse me, what made you pick that one up?" And I thought it was just another customer asking me, and I went into why, and they said, "Oh, it's really helpful. We actually own this one." And they had that conversation with me there and then, and it was like,
did you pick
so
up the opposite one or their one?
I picked up a different one. But I think actually we stayed in contact because I did, again, I found out who they were and I was like, this is amazing. And we've stayed in contact since. And they actually said, based on what we learned that day, helped us to change our packaging because we had those conversations. And I just say, again, marketing, it's like, speak to people. Again, they didn't have to spend any money on that, but they got the response they needed. And it's like, how do we be a bit more like that, in terms of asking people, like, to our point earlier about the data, digging into those things, like, why didn't you click that button and find out? So
yeah,
it involves us standing up and getting out there, I suppose.
It does.
Yeah.
And last thing I will say, I'm going to keep banging on otherwise. The last thing, and then I will shut up. I remember walking down, when you walk down like a public, like a big road or a busy road, and you get people going, "Can I stop you for 2 minutes?" And it's usually about a really good cause, and you're like, "Oh, I'm really busy."
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you feel dead inside that you didn't stop and help, sick animals or something.
Yeah.
The best one I ever had was someone literally was like, when you lock eyes with them and you're like, "Oh, I've done it now."
Mm-hmm.
I did that, and it's about 10 meters away. And they were like, "I literally need the first words that comes out of your mouth." So I sort of didn't say anything. There's up 2 empty, like, shampoo bottles. There was no label on it. It was just the shape of the bottles were different. They were like, "Which one?" And I was like, "That one."
Yeah.
They were like, "Cheers."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, that was fine, actually." And then I realized it was the original source people. Like, and the one I'd chosen was the one they used, but I imagine a million other people said the same thing. But he never asked me why. He never asked me anything at all other than just which one.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh,
Crazy.
weird." Than that one.
But it gives them a bit of data.
Yeah. And then I guess that helps them with their marketing around, if we have this shape, then we put this type of label on. Here's how we can, I don't know. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah. And we can replicate that, right? So we can find something that's like minimal effort, like, share something small, and then go out and just walk past people and say, "Did you see this? Like, why didn't you click on it?" And just ask a few questions, like, "Cheers, I took 5 minutes of your time for that." Like, how? And I think this is the thing about being inspired by things outside of learning or outside of the corporate world, and how is this inspiring what we do and what can we try out? And I think if we're constantly thinking that way, we'll improve. So
absolutely. And I think as you say, is curiosity and just putting yourself out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I would agree with that. Cool.
Nice one.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. This is where we usually ask people, have you got anything to plug? But you'd already told me up front, nothing to plug. So
not
I'm
selling anything.
nothing, not today. Soon maybe. But where can people find you if they want to catch up and say hello and talk about the episode and find out more about you?
Yeah. So, always wanting to connect with people on LinkedIn. So do just connect with me on there, drop me a message. You'll find me at Alice Thompson. I've got my picture on top of my profile says something cheesy like "future belongs to the curious," and I've had it on there for about 10 years and I still love it. So, so do connect with me, and honestly, just want to talk about absolutely anything that inspires you. And if you've got ideas and you want to just share it with someone, like, do drop me a message.
Cool. Nice one. Thank you so much, Alice. I really enjoyed this chat.
Thank you. Me too.
And everyone can find Alice on LinkedIn and take it from there.
Yeah, nice one.
Thanks, nice one. Greg. Thank you. See you soon.